Before getting into what makes these two builds unique from one another, it's important to go through their similarities and why these factors make the two builds as good as they are. First and foremost, this character weight class provides the most speed and weight without sacrificing too much mini turbo. These characters include Waluigi, Roy, and DK. Long story short, any weight class below doesn't have enough speed and weight to make it viable online despite the increased mini turbo stat, and the weight classes above don't have enough of a mini turbo stat, especially when it comes to the Wild Wiggler. Another reason why everyone uses Waluigi online is that the high mini turbo stat is secured with the roller or Azure roller tires. Simply put, there isn't another set of tires in this game that compares to the rollers. The bulk of your mini turbo stat comes from these tires, which explains why everyone uses Waluigi online. And for gliders, just use one of the following: the paper glider, cloud glider, parachute, or flower glider. I won't go into detail since any benefits or drawbacks you get from any glider are very subtle, but using one of these gliders provides you with the most benefits and the least drawbacks. That sets the stage for the best build in the game. The only part of a build we haven't covered yet is the frame. So without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Starting things off, the Wild Wiggler. Combined with the other parts, this build thrives in speed and weight compared to the Biddybuggy. This benefit is especially in effect on straightaways. If you have to avoid items coming your way and or you just don't want to chain mini turbos, you won't lose much speed at all. Long story short, you can effortlessly keep up with other builds with this one. However, this build's disadvantage cannot be ignored. It may seem subtle, but it does make the Biddybuggy a more appealing frame. Compared to Biddybuggy, the Wild Wiggler just isn't flexible. It can be a little difficult to handle the Wild Wiggler, and you can especially notice this in tight situations when you're trying to pick back up to speed after getting hit per se. You can mitigate this disadvantage by working on your driving and learning driving techniques, specifically soft drifting. I'll leave a link in the description to a video detailing soft drifting and other driving techniques that are vital to learn if you want to up your game as much as possible. Just remember that as much as you can minimize how much this disadvantage affects you, you'll almost never have to deal with this disadvantage on Biddybuggy. In summary, the Wild Wiggler is a great frame to maximize speed and weight while maintaining a solid mini turbo stat with the rest of the build. Admittedly, it's not the most flexible frame, but if you can master the driving in this game, you can undoubtedly leverage the Wild Wiggler's advantages. Now, let's see how it stacks up to the Biddybuggy. The Biddybuggy is a fantastic frame that shines in its handling and mini turbo stat. Contrary to the Wild Wiggler, the Biddybuggy is a very flexible frame, and when combined with the other factors I mentioned earlier in the build, your driving will flow very nicely. You won't have to worry much about soft drifting, although I still believe it's a crucial technique to learn whether you use this build or not. You'll also find taking turns to be way easier on the Biddybuggy, despite it being the slower build. Not only does the handling stat really benefit you, but because of the enhanced mini turbo stat, it is much easier to edge out whichever mini turbo you desire after said turn. Long story short, while you may have to put in more effort to be faster, Biddybuggy can be easier to drive than the Wild Wiggler. Once again, however, we do have to address the disadvantages. As I previously mentioned briefly, you have to put in more effort to be faster. Even though the Wild Wiggler and Biddybuggy lines are very similar, the main difference is that you don't always have to take the optimal lines to be fast on Wild Wiggler. You pretty much always have to on Biddybuggy. However, if you are really good at driving every track in this game, then mitigating this disadvantage shouldn't be a problem for you. The weight stat is also a subtle disadvantage, since you may find that Biddybuggy gets bullied around a little bit more than the Wild Wiggler. It's not the worst disadvantage you could have, but it's still worth mentioning. The easiest way to mitigate this disadvantage is to work on spacing from the other players around you if possible. In summary, the Biddybuggy thrives in its acceleration, handling, and especially mini turbo. It's definitely a more flexible frame than the Wild Wiggler, but at the highest level, you need to ensure that you can drive really well and that you can space from others well enough to avoid getting bumped around as much as possible. We've now covered both builds, how they differ from one another, and their advantages and disadvantages. So the big question is, what is the best build in the game? I should make it clear that you might find it easier to be the best you can be by using one or the other, regardless of which one is better. but altogether, the best build in this game is Waluigi on the Wild Wiggler. Yes, it does have a notable disadvantage in flexibility that can really mess with you in certain situations, but if you can hone your driving and get a great feel for this build, then not only will you easily be able to mitigate this disadvantage, but you'll undoubtedly be able to drive faster than Biddybuggy players for the most part. Biddybuggy has its perks and definitely gets the edge over Wild Wiggler in some aspects of the game, but at the highest level, you can leverage the Wild Wiggler more so than you can with the Biddybuggy. With that said, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. One last thing before I end the video off is that if you're a fan of mine, you might be wondering, why did I not mention Mr. Scooty when it has the same stats as Biddybuggy and I literally main the combo? Well, Mr. Scooty's hitbox is significantly smaller. While it can be seen as an advantage, and in some cases it is, it's more of a disadvantage for a few reasons I'll simply mention. It's easier to take better lines on Biddybuggy, it's easier to collect coins, and you'll never have to worry about driving in between item boxes. Biddybuggy has shined over Mr. Scooty over the last year or so I didn't bother to mention Mr. Scooty in my analysis today. But you can still use Mr. Scooty to compete at the top undoubtedly. Anyways, until next time, thank you so much for watching, have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.